Hello, hello. We'll give everyone a little bit to join. As y'all are joining, please say hi. Let us know who you are and where you're joining from so we can say hi to you. We are super excited for today's panel where we are going to talk a little bit more personally. So we are going to bring Chris and his family into the topic, into the conversation from a personal perspective. So today our goal is to really talk about a family's perspective of the journey of OCD, but also to talk about lessons learned. And even I'm going to push a little bit, Chris, of like what it's like now, because I think sometimes so many people hear from us as professionals, but the reality is we're still navigating OCD in different ways, and our family still does too. And to really talk about kind of the difference of then versus now and what that looks like. Before we jump in, hi, Caitlin, good to see you. Everybody else, please say hi. Let us know who you are and where you're joining from. I want to go through a couple announcements as we always do. So first and foremost, just a reminder of what the live stream is intended for. This is really intended for educational content and not to replace therapy. So we recommend that all individuals still have your own private individual therapist and that you don't rely on our segments to replace therapy for you. And of course, this is not a crisis hotline, nor is the IOCDF. So if yourself, a family member, or loved one are in crisis, feeling unsafe or suicidal, please call 911, go to your local emergency room, or call the suicide prevention line, which you can see listed right below at 1-800-273-8255. We want to make sure that we do our part to keep this a safe space. So we ask that you're really mindful of personal questions and comments that you leave, because anything that you put in the comment pane can be seen by others. And we want to encourage you to be respectful and help create a community for others, but don't necessarily answer their private questions either, because sometimes that may not be an appropriate way for us to communicate with one another. Good afternoon, Lana. Good to see you. Our biggest announcement that we want to make sure everybody is aware of and tuned into is that the online OCD camp is coming up in January. So we're just a couple of months away for this special unique camp that's created specifically for youth. So this is for ages 6 to 17. Over the years, we always get a lot of feedback about having more specific youth content and content where kids can be with other kids and connect with other kids or adolescents. And so this is the perfect place to do it. And of course, it's done online interactively from your homes. And so we definitely want you to check out iocdf.org/OCD camp to learn more. As always, please make sure you're checking out iocdf.org/peace of mind. This is where you're going to find out about all of our upcoming live streams, the events that Chris does, I do, Ethan Smith, Katie, Tom, you name it, all of our advocates are doing, and to really be able to know what content's coming up. But the bigger piece that's important to us is we want you to go here and put your questions, topics, comments that you want us to cover. We want to make sure we're covering content and things that you find useful. So we encourage you to please submit that there. Hi, Matthias. Good to see you. So happy to have you joining us from Brazil. Others, please say hi. Join us when you're here. Let us know where you're coming from. And also, more importantly, please make sure you put any questions or comments that you have for Liz, Selena, or Chris in the comment box throughout today's session. We will do our best to be answering live questions in addition to our kind of interview style conversation that we're going to have today, but we want to make sure that you post those questions that you have there so that we can address them. So let's hop in. You all might be wondering who's on the screen. You know who Chris is. So Chris, who I see below me, I don't know if everybody sees the format or layout the same way, but Chris co-hosts with myself these Lunch and Learns, and he is an amazing clinician at the Gateway Institute, on the board of OCD SoCal. And as all of you may or may not know, Chris is an amazing OCD advocate who's been advocating for many years. And on the screen next to me is Chris's mom, Liz, and his sister, Selena. And they are here today because today we're going to talk about a family's perspective of OCD. And I want us to talk a little bit about the journey to now. So some of you may or may not have seen it. We'll try to put it in the comment box as well. But Hear My Story did a recent documentary, Chris, and it has been incredible to watch your documentary and to just really see raw footage of what it was like for you in the midst of OCD. And I'm certainly hopeful and grateful that you're not there now, right? You're not in that same situation you were during the documentary. But for those who've watched it, and if you haven't, I recommend watching it, you really can see and feel the anxiety and distress that your OCD caused you. And while we'll talk a little bit about that today, I really want us to spend today talking about what that's like for family members. How do family members help navigate this difficult space, and help be present, be there for their loved one without giving into OCD? And Liz, I really want to hear from you a lot today about, Chris talked so much about how you were kind of his push and advocate of like, we're doing this, and like we're doing ERP, and this is what it's going to look like. And not everybody has that same experience where their kids are willing, or where they're able to go and engage in ERP when mom wants. And so I want us to talk about kind of what went well, what didn't. But to start, why don't you both, what doesn't everyone, maybe we'll start with you, Liz and Selena, if y'all will just introduce yourselves and maybe talk a little bit about what you do now as far as OCD work and OCD advocacy, because I know you both are still actively involved in the field.
Hi, my name's Liz, Chris's mom, Selena's mom. And right now, Chris and I, along with another therapist, run a family support group. And our group has been going since 2012. And right now it's on Zoom, but we used to meet in person and will again someday. So we are there to provide support for families. It has people with OCD and family members. And my main purpose in that group is to provide hope, let people know. I get a lot of phone calls when people find us, and it's important to me to let them know there's an end to this, that there's hope, and there's therapy, there's a possibility that their child is going to have a great life. And Chris and Tiffany, the other therapist, they provide a lot of information, a lot of answers for people. And then the people in the support group support each other. So that's what I do at this time.
Awesome.
And you're on the board of OCD SoCal. You should probably say that.
Oh yeah, I'm on the board of OCD.
Just that.
Right. I'm the event planner. So I work on a lot of the details when we put on our conferences or any other events for Southern California. Amazing. Yeah, that too.
Yes. Both huge and important things, and a big piece of advocacy, right? I know that support groups are a place for many of us where it's an opportunity to feel connected. And I will say that mom to mom connection of folks with OCD is really critical and important. So thank you for doing that work. Selena.
Hi. Well, now I guess for a turn of events, I work with Chris at the Gateway, and didn't see that happening, but it's been a great experience in the sense of kind of, as mom was saying, of getting to be a part of this, and just remembering our experience. So that is in my mind every day when I'm speaking with families and clients and people with OCD going through this, is just trying to remember what that was like for us. And I'm going to age us here when, remembering mom on the internet, dial-up internet, just frantically looking for anything, and seeing how far resources have come. Things like you guys, both of you have been doing for years, that I think is amazing, because we didn't have that. And so that's in my mind every day of, how would I want someone to have spoken with my mom if she was calling the office? How would I want someone to speak to my brother when he was, in the thick of things? And so that's just been a very rewarding experience for me of kind of getting to be on this side and being involved, and just every day trying to make that experience better for people, much better than we had.
Absolutely. And what a blessing for those families, for you to get to be a point of contact and a resource for them, because I know you're right. When I get a chance, I love to talk to people in so many different capacities. And I think Chris would tell you, we love our clinical work, but the other work we get to do as well is some of the work that makes the biggest difference, because it's just in those conversations and in those moments when you can have a little bit better clarity and understanding of what they're going through, because you guys have been there as well. Chris, anything you want to add?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's kind of, I feel like you and I do a lot of parallel work, and that's because it's been great. My mom, my sister, and I all could have just been like, all right, it's been fun, like peace. But I think there was just as you saw in the documentary, but just in general, how much OCD like impacted my life. It was like a huge part. It wasn't this small minor thing. It was just this huge, overwhelming shift in the direction of my life. And OCD is a family disorder, so it really took my sister on, it took my mom on, and it made us all have to go down this path. And so, the work that I do with my mom at OCD SoCal and this, family and loved one support group that we do monthly, it's just been fun to work alongside her, and that's been really our goal. And now seeing my sister work with me and just being able to come from an insider's perspective to people that call in and people that ask questions and people that come to our clinic because she's gone through it as well. And so it's just been amazing to really just to try to provide resources and direction and education and hope to people. So it's been fun being a family affair. It's been one of the ways that we've all kind of stuck together. I mean, we're still a close family, but now having this whole journey with us together has made us even closer. And it's just great when we hear positive feedback from families. And, my mom and I and my sister have been really open about the things that didn't work and what we try to get families not to do, as well as things that were really, really successful for us as well. So just giving people understanding from where we're coming from and trying to guide people and navigate them through the journey and make sure it's a lot smoother than ours was.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times from the outside, sorry, y'all, I keep like moving because I see this lunch and learn thing keeps cutting my head off. So, I think a lot of times families have this perspective or belief that, oh, like y'all have it together, therefore you must have done everything right. And I want us to talk about what went well, but I also want us to talk about lessons learned and what didn't go so well. Or, Liz and Selena, I would love to hear too from you of, what do you wish maybe you would have done different, or what would you have done different now, having the knowledge that you have? And of course, we should never be upset about things we didn't do, because hindsight's 2020, right? We didn't know what we didn't know then, but now that you have so much more education, so many more connections and resources in the OCD community, would you have done anything different when you first started to see symptoms? So we will definitely talk about that, but let's start with your journey. So Chris, why don't you introduce a little bit of background? I don't think you have to go into full detail, but just like a background of your journey towards treatment and what it was like for you as the individual and patient, not here as Chris Trondsen, a clinician. And then Liz and Selena, I want to hear from y'all of like the journey as well and what it was like for you being parents and a sibling.
Yeah, in retrospect, I look back and so many of the things that people called me difficult for. I mean, I really had this belief that I was a very difficult person and difficult child. And when I look back, especially when I work with kids and I work with other people, I look at all the things that I see them do and I'm like, I did those things. And so OCD never until my senior year of high school showed up to be so aggressive that it called to action. But it was just all of these behaviors that I just had to do. And I used anger a lot of times to get people in my family to do what I needed to do because I didn't know what I was going through. And so it all came to a head. I mean, it started showing signs as a child, but it all came to a head at my senior year where I couldn't get to school. I was barely able to graduate. I started to withdraw. And when I moved out of my house and started to go to college is when it all fell apart. So at my worst, I was living with a roommate. We had totally dissolved our relationship just because of my symptoms. And I was spending 16 hours a day doing compulsions. I rarely leave the house for years. I disconnected with my sister, with my family. And it was just all of the obsessions consistently throughout the day. There wasn't a break, and compulsions in response to those all day. And pretty much it got to a point where it felt like Groundhog's Day, where I was just waking up, doing the compulsions, going to bed. And so after doing that intensely for 3 years with no job and no work and no family really involvement, because I was moved away and not really talking to people, it got to a point of just added depression and isolation and panic attacks and just being really terrible. And so for me in my journey, I unfortunately made the decision to try to take my own life. And that was really the worst and best thing that happened to me, because thank God it didn't go through and I was able to get medical care and I was able to open up to my family. But we went through the path of trying to get me help, and we had horrible therapists in the beginning that just gave us no hope and said that I was a terrible case and I would never get better and I'd live at home and my mom was going to have to take care of me. And, maybe I'd see some symptoms, but there was a therapist that was like the OCD expert in our area who said it was the worst case he ever saw. And maybe after 4 years, I could see some symptom reduction, but pretty much this was my life. And so that's why we're so thankful to the IOCDF, is because my mom found the IOCDF found a therapist that was about a 4-hour round trip from my house because of good old LA traffic. And we started seeing somebody that really understood this space, and, hearing what this disorder was and going through the Y box assessment and finding out that this was a disorder that had treatment was amazing. And so we did a lot of things wrong, a lot of things right. But after about 14 months to 2 years, because there was some support group in there, I got to a point where I started to get my life back. And so after that, obviously, it was continuing with response prevention. It was getting back to work and school and friends and dating, and then just building my life. And it turned into advocacy as sort of giving back. So there's a lot of really big lows. I always tell people I wasn't the perfect client. I didn't just shoot to the finish line. There's a lot of ups and a lot of downs, but I really credit my sister, who was, even though she wasn't around a lot because she was off at college, was very, very sympathetic. And I credit my mom, who did a lot of the hard work and was supportive. And unfortunately, a lot of my family didn't understand, weren't supportive, and didn't get it. And since then, obviously, as more information has gone out, they've kind of turned a corner and they get what I was going through. But at the time, it felt like a very isolated journey.
Totally. Well, thank you for sharing. And I see the questions pouring in. We will get to those, but I want to give Liz and Selena a chance to share a little bit, and then we will definitely dive into questions as well. So Liz and Selena, we'd love to hear your perspective of what it was like at the beginning, and just watching Chris go through, obviously, the difficult times and then the path to treatment and recovery.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of the problems that I had is that I didn't understand mental illness. It never even occurred to me. I do think that there's so much more information about mental illness that parents today might clue in on it or think, oh, I wonder if something's wrong. But that absolutely never occurred to me. As Chris said, I thought he was just so difficult, and very concerned for him, what he was doing as a teenager. And when he moved out, I was thinking, wow, he's growing up. Everything's great. I had no idea that what was going on all those years. Absolutely none. He didn't want to talk. Everything was fine. So when he came to me and told me, that he had tried to hurt himself, I just couldn't believe that I knew so little about my son, that I knew nothing about his life, that I could have lost him without even knowing what he had gone through. So for me, the answer was I had to fix it. I just had to fix it. So as he said, we started looking for therapists, and as everybody knows, you need a therapist trained in CBT and ERP, and we didn't. I went through insurance. We found a therapist that was not very helpful, a lot of crying days, a lot of days of staring at my son's pictures and thinking, I've lost him, he's gone. I remember my first conference I went to, there was nobody that had any positive something to say. This was back in 2002. Nobody seemed to be getting better. And I would have done anything for somebody to tell me that my son's life was not over, that he could get better. So that's why that is so important for me to say that to every new person that comes. Your child will get better if they do the work, because I didn't see any hope. I thought his life was done. I just didn't have any idea that he could get better. And I learned that through him seeing a good therapist, but also through educating myself and him so much, going for as many resources, learning as much as I could about the disorder and mental illness and how to help him. But it was so scary. It was scary. Chris is very outgoing, and he would call me and he would tell me what was going on in his mind, like for an hour or two. And that is so scary to hear inside an OCD mind. Very scary. And I just had to educate myself, because I had no idea, no frame of reference, no knowledge. And I was just scared, very, very scared.
Yeah. I would say definitely the beginning stages were probably the hardest and probably the the lowest for all of us as a family, I'd say. High school years were very difficult, as Chris said. That was, just very low of just, we had no communication as a family. I think everyone was just kind of living their separate lives and kind of, I always say, like roommates more so than anything. And it was sad because we were closer and everything kind of just broke down. I think we were all so tired and just trying to survive that's all we could do at that time. And so I would say that's probably a large part of where I feel the guiltiest as well. Is I went to college because I wanted to leave and get away. I went as far as she'd let me and pay for. I wanted to go even further across the country, but just so I wouldn't have to come home. And I hate saying that, but it was true. I just felt like at that point it was my time. I had been put through so much in that house that I just wanted my freedom. I wanted to have my time, not to think about anyone else. But that's also where the guilt comes in because I didn't check in on both of them. I think that's where we lost a lot of communication as well. I mean, we were still communicating, but they kind of kept me out of what was going on. So I didn't understand the severity level. I don't think for years I found out that he had attempted suicide. I don't think I knew. And then, of course, when you find out, you're putting yourself back going, wow, I was at a college party and my brother almost died. Like how, so that's the regret for sure. But it's hard because I needed that time. But I think that's where I would tell other families, with knowing what I know now is the communication is such a large part of it. And no, you don't want the other family members to feel like, mom would always tell me that, like, I'm the mom, you worry about you. But I think I could have been a lot more supportive. I think I should have understood this disorder more during that time. Obviously, what I know now, knowing what was going on between both of them and what they were dealing with, to understand how to better, support and not enable Chris and learning about accommodation and reassurance. I didn't know that vocabulary. I think I could have helped a lot better and been more supportive. And I think I feel guilty for the isolation that he felt during that time. And I think I could have been, a better sister at that time for sure. I guess that I would say that was definitely what I feel I did wrong during that time. Yeah.
And I hear you saying what you did wrong, Selena, but one of the things I also hear is like, you didn't know, right? So it's like, I think, and as I'm listening as an individual with OCD, I'm thinking like, it was probably to protect you, right? And even Chris, I bet now would say like, he's happy you were able to enjoy your college life and wouldn't have wanted his OCD to ruin that experience. But at the same time, I can see where it's like, but for you and for him, right? Chris, I don't even know, did you know that Selena didn't know, or did you feel like she didn't care? Like, what was it like for you as a sibling being like, where's my sister? Like in the middle of this?
Yeah, it was hard because I did go to my mom once because I had been reaching out to my sister, I don't think I ever opened up about OCD per se. I remember we had like a family dinner and I was so bad at one point where my dad was literally like cooking my food, slicing it up. There's even times he had to like feed me or like hold stuff because I was just bad. We were at like a family event and I was sitting there and I wanted to get food and just couldn't because touching the food, I was contaminated. I was going to do something. And my sister was like, can I help you? And things. And I think, and she saw my hands raw and red. And I think that's when she first saw it. But I remember going to my mom and saying like, hey, why isn't Selena calling back, et cetera. But what's so difficult is now in retrospect, it's like, of course she wanted to get away. I was angry. I was slamming doors. I was screaming all the time. I was doing compulsions for hours. Like nobody wanted to be around me. But because it was my life, I didn't realize that it had such an effect on people. It was so like just trying to survive. So there's no anger or disappointment. In fact, it's the opposite. I'm so happy that she didn't get sucked down because I have so much guilt for my mom, like the trajectory her life went in, obviously like her struggling and not knowing what to do and just this like huge dip. And the disorder kind of took us both down. So in retrospect, I'm happy my sister got the heck away. But I think that was one of the things we didn't do well with communication, because I did feel abandoned because she wasn't calling me back. But once again, like now, like with clarity and stuff, I'm so happy. I think if I would have known my sister would have been at school worrying about me, or coming home just to see me, or not going to places because she was worried about me, I would have felt 10 times worse that now one more person's life was negatively impacted by this disorder.
Right, right. And so it's kind of that catch of like, you wanted her to be there, but at the same time, in that moment, can a college age sibling process that information and be there and still have their life? Like maybe she wouldn't have been able to have both. And maybe her not knowing was an opportunity for her to even be at college. Liz, would you have done anything different around communication with Selena, looking back and thinking about kind of, you know, her ability or inability to be there for Chris because she didn't know?
That's the first time I've been asked that question. And you know what? I'm going to answer it the same way Chris did. I know there were definite negatives by not keeping her involved, but I wanted so much for her to enjoy college, because I knew she'd been cheated out of stuff in high school, and that it had been such a so much tension in the house, always waiting for what Chris was going to do next. That I wanted her to have such a good time. And that to me, I felt that if I had told her, I'm just trying to make my life better. You know, it's great to talk to somebody, but it shouldn't be my daughter, and she shouldn't be taking on any of this. So with clarity and in retrospect, I'd say no. But maybe there's a way to let her know, but I know my daughter, it would have affected her school. Now, maybe others could say, you know, their child would be fine, etc. But,
or what would it be like to tell her, having the education you have now, right? To be able to kind of say like, hey, I want to give you a heads up that like your brother's been struggling, but we're in therapy and here's what he's doing. And like, I'm so happy, and he's so happy that he has a diagnosis and there's effective treatment, right? But where it's not as much of like, here's the suffering, like, here's the struggle, here you go. But instead of like, hey, like we're finding solutions and like we're helping get Chris to a healthy place. And like maybe you could call and give him some motivation. Like, I wonder if, knowing that now, where the shift changed, if there would have been an opportunity to have communication that might have been educational for Selena, but not pulled her into the symptoms.
I think that's very possible. I'm going to say, knowing my daughter, she would have turned some of her focus to her brother. That's who she is. So
what do you still aren't sure? Yeah, and there's no right or wrong, right?
No, I think I think I definitely probably would have, but I think in the sense of, yes, at that time, again, we didn't know any of this, where I think it's a lot more available if you're reading online or you're seeing stories or things like that, that we could have seen that positive. I think at our time it was so negative that no, I think I would have worried too. I do remember when Mom did call me, but also remember, this is when text messages were 10 cents a text message. And we used to get yelled at if we sent any, or if I went over calls. So I was being very cautious as well of that. But she did call me and say, you know, your brother's kind of hurt, like you're ignoring him. And I think that had to change. I think that was my junior or senior year. And then I think we did communicate a lot better after that. I think what could have maybe been a little more effective again on my side is understanding it and then communicating with him, like, what do you need from me? What could I do? So that maybe I could have been more of a relief of, oh my God, I just did 3 hours of treatment. Can we just talk about nonsense stuff? Or to give Mom a break, even of like someone else, talk to him, give him something, because I have to be the mom. I have to be the OCD person. You can be the, but I also didn't have a car to come home or anything. So that's her fault. That could have come back and gotten him and taken him out. But, stuff like that we could have planned probably better of, hey, come pick me up or come take Chris down here to school, drop us off somewhere, and we can just go do nonsense stuff where he can have a break and he can just feel normal and not in therapy and not have to talk about that. I think maybe we could have done that a little better.
And been able to have fun family time, right?
Yeah.
Like if there was a way to do that where you can reestablish the relationship, not around OCD, even if he's struggling with OCD. And I know there's so much to go on about this and to keep debating and thinking, but it's so great to hear the different perspectives and to hear that even now, right? I actually love the fact that y'all have the education you have, the background you have now, and you're both still like, I don't know if I would have done it different. And I still don't know that there's a right or wrong. And the reason I want everybody to hear this is that there isn't a right or wrong. You do what's best for you and best for your family unit in that moment. And that's actually the right choice, right? Because we have to decide, what does Selena have capacity for? What's going to make the most sense for our family, right? Like it's about thinking about the whole picture. And a lot of us could easily say, oh, you should have done this or you should have done that. And you're like, maybe, but like, I don't know that in my family that would have made sense.
Yeah. And I think that's where I just say too of overall is the communication of everybody just being kind of as honest and open as they can. Whereas maybe the person with OCD, as much as they can articulate, because I know a lot of times that's difficult where you're in the throw of things, but saying like, here's what I need. And then us on the family side, obviously making sure it's not accommodation or reassurance, but just kind of saying, hey, this from you would be helpful or this from you. And then kind of being able to do that to navigate it together, the best that you can. I think that's where I think, even though we don't know how we would have done it differently or things like that, I would definitely say everybody communicating together and seeing, as you said, kind of what role each person can play to make it more of a team and to give the person with OCD that relief with some family member or something where there's still that communication and, their involvement, but maybe if it is a sibling, still getting to be the sibling and live their life as well.
Totally. I love it. I love the collaborative communication piece and the importance of that. Liz, I have a question for you. I was just thinking before Chris, I want to move back down to you, is now one of the things you said earlier is that you had no idea what was going on. You had no idea through childhood what Chris was struggling with. You also thought he was just a difficult child. What are some signs and symptoms that you know now you wish you would have known then, of like, I wish I would have been more in tune to that, or I wish I would have seen that as this, which maybe would have created an opportunity for a path to treatment earlier?
I think looking back, his focus and his anger when he needed something, that I can say is not normal teenage behavior. If he needed the lights turned off because of his feelings or what was going on in his head, it wasn't like, hey, can we turn the lights off? It's like, the lights are off. Well, Chris, we're doing this. The lights are off. And he'd get so angry and that. And I don't know why at this point I thought that was just normal teenage behavior. But that was one of the things. And very particular, like, don't touch that, or you can't be into this room. Don't go in here. And again, not like I would think now like a teenager, hey, don't go in my room. That's my room. But don't go in this room. A really, really angry kind of, that it had to be his way. And if it wasn't, he got so angry to the point of, we feared at times of possible violence. And looking back now, it's like, that's not a normal teenager saying, Mom, it's none of your business. That's somebody that cannot let that go at all.
And when I hear it, Chris, I don't hear it as anger. I hear it as trigger, right? So I hear somebody who was really triggered and didn't know how to manage their emotions and the anxiety that they were feeling in that moment. And so the urgency, right? You and I talk about this all the time, is that one of the ways we know when it's OCD is it urgent, right? The lights need to be off or blank, 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 right? You can't touch that, because if you do this, and so if people don't understand it, we're not having a communication of like, hey, that's contaminated, don't touch it. It can. And so Chris, can you tell a little bit about why the lights needed to go off, why they couldn't touch certain things, why they couldn't go in certain rooms? Where was OCD there?
Yeah, and they totally, absolutely, like, hit it on the nail. I mean, there was no exactly, like, it wasn't necessarily angered, it was triggered, and so, I got really particular with my stuff. So an example is, like, I used to get really mad because I thought my mom wasn't washing my clothes properly, and so she was like, "Then you wash it," and I started using bleach on everything because, and then you could buy Clorox too, which is colored bleach, so I was just bleaching the heck away of stuff, and then, we had a cat and I would close my doors because I didn't want the cat to touch my towels. And then I didn't want my towels in the bathroom because I didn't want my family to touch the towels. So then I started hanging the towels in my room with my locked doors. And for me, it was a lot of particular stuff around contamination, just afraid that they're going to get something on my towels, on my clothes, on my bed, all those different things. And, it would cause me, the thing is, like, my core fear of all of this stuff came later. Like, in the beginning it was just I needed everything done a certain way. So I think a lot of it in the beginning was just right. I mean, I just needed things to be certain ways because it felt off. And then, like, sometimes it was like numbers, like I had to go to bed by a certain time, and then later it became magical thinking. So when I didn't live with my mom, I had to go to bed at 12:45 and wake up at 9:45, or something would happen bad that day, and then it got in my head my mom might die, and it was just all this stuff. And because it was so new to me, I just couldn't, like, really figure it out. So the big thing at home, when I finally kind of figured what a fear was, is I had seen this news special on, like, toxic mold, and there was, like, some homes in this tract that was, like, near ours, and it was just this news special about, like, toxic mold. And so there was mold in our bathroom because I was showering for hours for such a long time, and I had to have the door shut because I didn't want contamination to come in while I was showered, and then I would shower myself on the contamination, which makes no sense now, but it felt so real back then. And so it was like this fear that there was, like, mold getting on my stuff, and I was going to get sick, and I was going to die, and I was going to get cancer and all these different things. And, my grandpa had died from cancer when I was around, like, 17 or 18. And so then it was like a fear of that. So there's just all these different, like, contamination, health fears, things needing to be a certain way, just right. But a lot of times I didn't even know. It was just like, it felt right to do something, like have the light off or whatever it was. And then they obviously, it would inconvenience them. So then I'd get very upset at them. And so that's when it was not necessarily like anger at them. It was like anger at the situation, because if I didn't do it, I just knew I was going to be miserable and panicked, and my heart was going to race, and I was going to be uncomfortable and I couldn't focus. So it was just a lot of that
Yeah, it was
constantly.
the reality of a family trying to survive with someone with OCD when we didn't know they had OCD, right? So it's like you're experiencing these triggers, you're experiencing these fears, and thank you for sharing. I know that is really important to viewers, because what happens is that for Selena and Liz, we can start to identify, right? Like, this wasn't just anger, right? From the outside, it appeared that Chris is just angry all the time and Chris just has to have things his way. But it actually has nothing to do with Chris wanting things his way or him being angry. It has to do with, if he doesn't do it, there's this horrible fear or this immense amount of anxiety he has to experience that he doesn't know how to tolerate as a teenager who hasn't yet identified his symptoms as being OCD, and certainly has no idea that treatment even exists. So let's jump into treatment, and then I want us to get to questions as well, because we're getting lots of different ones. But tell us a little bit about your path to treatment, Chris, and what it was like for you when you realized that they're actually, like, I love, Liz, what you said is that you thought life was over and you didn't have much hope. And a lot of y'all kept hearing that. And my heart breaks for that, because that's the one thing Chris and I push all the time in the advocacy community, is so many times we're sharing our stories and we're talking about how hard OCD is, and OCD sucks, OCD is hard. We all know that. But sometimes we stop there and we don't give that message of hope, and we don't we don't do the work we need to do to help everyone understand that while it's hard, difficult, and sucks, there is treatment and you can have an amazing life despite this diagnosis. And I loved when you were able to say now that, like, you wish you had known more, that it's not like a life sentence. It's not this diagnosis that, like, you just have to accept as misery forever. It's a diagnosis. It's hard, right? But treatment exists and hope is available. And so, Chris, talk to us a little bit about what it was like when you did get the treatment and you started to realize that hope exists.
Yeah, so our first step was I went to my mom's house. I actually found out what OCD was is because one of the nights that I was like in the middle of the night. I used to only leave my house like on Sundays and go to this 24-hour Ralph's at 3 a.m. to buy like enough supplies for the week. And I was waiting for the people to come up to register me. And I read this like teen magazine, which is always the most embarrassing part of my story, that I'm reading like 17 magazine at 3 a.m. at Ralph's. And there was this little article about OCD, and I'd reached out to my mom and said, hey, I think this is what I have. And she did some looking up. And because my symptoms were so different, we decided it wasn't that. But after the suicide attempt and I was like spiraling, I went to my mom and I'm like, I don't feel like this is just depression, because I think that's what everybody thought I had. And so my mom's like, let me look. And when we found, and my mom started doing more research and asking me questions, we went through our insurance. And I remember I was in her backyard because I couldn't go in her house because it had been tented for termites. And I felt like I was going to inhale that and, you know, my lungs would collapse or I'd get a disease. So we started calling around, and I went to a couple different therapists, and they just didn't know the OCD space. And when I started talking about what I was going through, even though they claimed to know OCD, it was just beyond their scope. So once again, we had that one doctor that said he treated OCD. He was the go-to guy. And he's the one that told us like, oh, it's 4 years till you see any symptom reduction. He's going to be living at home. He'll never get a job. And this is sort of just like, that's just it. You have an adult child you're going to have to take care of with special needs. So when my mom found the International OCD Foundation and reached out to my treatment center where I got help at, and they had answers. This wasn't new to them. This wasn't a mystery. They had been doing it for years. And so I went to that first session. I just remember doing the assessment. And like I said, I was like, this woman either like knows OCD or she's been living in my basement, because everything she's saying is my experience. And so because it was up in LA, I would drive halfway. My mom would meet me and we'd go to treatment together. And it was really difficult in the beginning, just getting out of the house, being on time. But with my mom meeting me and getting me there in the beginning, it was helpful. And as I started getting symptom reduction, I was able to be on time and be more consistent. But it was definitely an up and down thing. There was times where I couldn't do the exposures or I struggled, but because of my mom's tenacity and just really being there and pushing me and making it like, this is going to happen regardless of your fears, I never thought giving up on treatment was an option. And my therapist was, I was loving but firm, and she was supportive, but she was firm. And I knew I had to show up and do my work. And so after 14 months of treatment weekly, we had looked into intensives because I was really severe, but the intensives all had like 6 to 8 month waiting lists. And because I just attempted, they were like, you need to get into something. So luckily, every day between my sessions, I was at home. I had my homework sheet on the fridge. I was doing my exposures every day. I was communicating with my mom. She was supporting me. So after 14 months, I ended up being a part of a support group. So my treatment was about 2 years, but it was medication. It was staying on the medication while I was still having symptoms, and then eventually tapering down and getting off meds. But it was a lot of just hopelessness in the beginning when we had inadequate treatment.
One of the things I'm wondering, Chris, because you've talked a lot about your journey with BDD, is when did you get your BDD diagnosis, and when did you understand? Because sometimes we'll find that like OCD diagnosis might come first and people know that better, and BDD may or may not be treated appropriately for a little while.
Yeah. So when I was in with my therapist and I was talking about my core fears, some of my core fears were definitely, a lot of it was health OCD and like dying and getting sick and all that. But sometimes it was also, I had a really preoccupation with my skin and my acne. And I would get frustrated because I'd go to dermatologists and I would tell them like, I have horrific acne. I need to get on Accutane and I needed all this stuff. And they're looking at me like, and especially somebody who wants to sell you stuff, telling you like, no, you don't need this. Your skin isn't bad. And so when I was working with my therapist, I didn't open up about that because there was so much shame and I didn't want to talk. I was like, I'm a guy, I'm not supposed to talk about my appearance. But when we started talking about stuff, she was like, that doesn't make sense how it's connected with your health. Like, I don't see the connection. I was like, well, this one is, I'm really afraid it's going to give me acne. And so when I started opening up about that, my therapist just happened to have BDD. She had gotten scarred on her face, and it was this little scar that's to this day I never saw, but she opened up to me and said, you know, I had BDD around my scar and I had to get treatment for it. And there's a man, Ari Winograd, who has a BDD treatment center nearby who's starting a support group. Would you want to do an assessment? So we did an assessment. And once again, another person I thought was living in my bushes, because everything he was saying, I'm like, that's me. And so, you know, there was hardcore OCD and hardcore BDD. And I remember just thinking this OCD stuff is already difficult, but because I was seeing a different clinician for the BDD, it was great because it was like learning two languages. Like when I was with my OCD therapist, I was speaking that. When I was with my BDD therapist, I was speaking that. And it started to answer a lot of the holes that were filled because there was certain stuff I did as a kid that wasn't really about being particular or OCD or needing things. So the lights that my mom talked about earlier, I thought my skin was so bad that I didn't want bright lights on it to be embarrassed and to be seen. So that's why the lights had to be off. Whereas like the mold was like the health and my lungs collapsing and can't breathe and die. So I had to now juggle both of these things. But luckily there was enough of a similarity mindset in it that both of them kind of lent to treatment similarly. It wasn't like having OCD and maybe like schizophrenia or bipolar or autism where the treatment's just so different.
Right. But what a blessing that you had a clinician who early on was able to kind of recognize both, because that often isn't the case, right? We know people get mistreated and misdiagnosed. And I talk about this all the time. I was talking about this here at our clinic. I was saying to individuals, like, no one is here just for OCD, right? Once you come here, some people have OCD, some people have depression, some people have social anxiety, some people have personality stuff, some people have BDD. And we need to like differentiate them, because what we don't want to do is treat everything as OCD if it's not, right? If someone's dealing with PTSD, we don't want to lean into uncertainty day one around PTSD symptoms that look like OCD, but they're actually PTSD. And so the more somebody is specialized and able to really do treatment and a good assessment, they'll be able to help get you on the right path. Liz and Selena, I can see y'all, but maybe there's issues with muting or unmuting.
You guys look fine on our end. Is it not unmuting?
I don't think they can see us, maybe.
You know what? They're next door. Do you want me to run real quick? Do you want to say something and I'll check it?
Sure. Or bring them in your office, whatever you want.
Yeah.
So one of the things we're going to do is we're going to hop into questions, and then we are certainly going to spend some time still hearing from Liz, Selena, and Chris, because the back end from IOCDF is having trouble unmuting as well. So let's hop into some of the questions. And Phyllis, I love hearing that you did watch Chris's Hear My Story. And yes, while it is certainly a courageous video and one that goes through some of his deepest and darkest times, it certainly was inspiring. So I recommend individuals watching it. Majo, you asked a question about, have any genes been identified to impact OCD? And if so, would it help a lot in, if yes, then it would help a lot in targeted therapy. It's a good question. We know that there's a genetic component to OCD. We know that OCD is neurobiological, and we believe that there is certainly a genetic predisposition, right? So I know my 6-month-old daughter has a much higher likelihood of having OCD than somebody's daughter from parents who don't have OCD. But what we don't, that has not led us yet to any targeted treatment or specific medication interventions based on any gene or genome sequencing. To my knowledge, I'm sure it's being worked on. I can feel confident actually that it's being worked on, but we're not there yet. But we do know there's a genetic component.
They're back.
Yay, everyone's back. Debbie said, glad you didn't believe the other well-meaning people who gave such a bad prognosis and that you got your life back. And Selena and Liz, I'd love to hear about this for a second from you, because I heard this all the time as well, right? I talk a lot about how in my story, we would go from provider to provider and we were told, like, we've never seen a case as severe as Liz's. There's not treatment available for her. Y'all should accept she'll be in a mental health clinic the rest of her life. And I'm still always baffled as a clinician. Chris, I'm sure you are too, of like, what purpose did they think saying that served? But also, like, why would they say that when I was in the room? Because they actually would say that in front of me. And I still have never figured that out. But what was it like to hear that? But more importantly, Liz, what made you keep fighting? Why did you not buy what they were saying?
I remember, as I said before, I remember sitting on my bed looking at a picture of my son, and it was an old picture because of BDD. He hadn't taken pictures in years, and I just cried because I had thought I'd lost him. It was the most horrific thing. It's a horrible thing to say to somebody in this position. Why did I keep going? 2 reasons. One is because that's who I am. I don't give up easily. But second of all, it was finding resource. It was finding the IOCDF on the computer. And, this sounds silly, but everybody has to remember it was 2002. And computers for me, I'm years behind my kids. I don't just go to my computer. I had to think about it. Today I Google anything. So finding that and just reading a different side of it, and knowing that what this person told me doesn't sound like what these people are telling me. And I did go and get 2 books from the library, which of course means they were a little older. And the first one I picked up, the first chapter was all about how a bad mother causes OCD.
Oh boy.
And you know what? For some reason, I put that book away and I thought, you know what? I'm just not going to accept this is all my fault and there's nothing to do. So I think part of it was the education, knowing that the story I was being told wasn't the only story, and the fact that I'm not giving up on my son. I mean, I'm just not giving up.
It's like this weird innate mother's instinct to advocate, right? Like you have to be Chris. You had to be Chris's advocate when he couldn't be his own, and thank God for that, because Chris, you wouldn't have gotten the treatment, you wouldn't have gotten to the resources and been where you are, and that's just amazing. And it's something that I'm learning a lot, even as a mom of a 6-month-old. There's been a couple situations, like quick side story, but my daughter has a dairy allergy and we didn't know. And I kept taking her to the doctor and I kept saying, like, something is wrong. Like, I've been around tons of kids, something's wrong. She's in pain. When she would see the bottle, she would just scream and cry and turn her head, refusing to eat. And they kept brushing it off. Oh, Liz, you're a new mom. You're just anxious. And I was like, no, like something is. And some of my friends who are moms kept saying, believe your mom's instinct, right? Keep advocating. And finally, after a lot of unfortunate situations, after we ended up in the hospital here, it was like, oh yeah, she's allergic to dairy. And it's like, well, this could have prevented a lot of pain she had to go through for the last 6 months, right? And I think 2 things are remarkable about this that I love. One, your willingness to advocate to a point where you believe your own instincts that Chris could have a healthy, productive life above what doctors and healthcare professionals should have. And B, that you outsmarted them. You did. Right. I always say this, like, why would my parents not believe neither of my parents have college degrees. Why would they have not believed the healthcare professionals who are trained medical doctors saying there's not help? Because they knew better, right? They knew to keep fighting, and they knew that they didn't need to accept that. And you taught Chris that, right? Chris is a fighter as well and doesn't take no easily. And that's certainly something.
Well, could I add one thing? I was going to say what I think mom does well about in anything, but especially this case, and now I see it in Chris as a clinician, is I feel like she already saw him at the end and was able to kind of guide him to that. Even if he didn't see it, she already saw him like successful treatment. He's here. So for her to be able to see that when he's already, just taking baby steps, I think it just kind of kept her as like a compass of, nope, we're going this way. Even if the path looks like that, it's still here. We're getting
back on this track.
And I feel I see that now as Chris and a clinician working here, is he already sees you when you come in here. And you might not see it. You might not like what he's doing, but he's going to get you here. And that's why he's so successful is he, sometimes I feel like he wants it more than them. And that's probably what mom at the time, they know what the ending can look like. And even if you give up, they're going to make sure they're just kind of carrying you there until you see it.
They're not going to give up, right? They're going to be that anchor, that force, that reminder when we can't see it ourselves. And that's incredible, Liz, and Selena as well. Chris, one of the questions at 11:16 from Felice is, my husband's doing what you did. It's horrible. He doesn't feel he has the strength to do ERP. How would you motivate him to do treatment?
I would say, one of the things in the beginning, I wasn't at a place that I thought I could do it. And so I needed that help. And my mom, looking for the treatment, finding the treatment and setting it up. That was what I needed. I ended up taking over. What helped me is my mom probably remembers this. We went down in 2000, I think it was 2003. And I was in treatment, but I was still not on the fence, but I was still struggling. And my mom and I went down to the San Diego conference, and we had planned to be there the weekend. My family was there. We have family down there. I could only go a day because the OCD was so bad. But that's when I first saw you speak, and you're around the same age. And I remember seeing you speak and thinking, And, and then there was another girl who had started a support group in Long Beach. And I'm like, okay, here's these two girls my age and they're doing the treatment and they're getting better. And so it gave me hope. And I remember going back and talking, it wasn't a very successful conference for me because my OCD was so bad. We left, and I remember eating a sandwich and mayonnaise got on me and I had to leave. I mean, it was just a mess. But seeing you speak and seeing this other girl start a group, like I went back to my therapist and I'm like, these are like the real first people I've ever seen that have had OCD. And so what I tell people, Felice, is that if your husband doesn't think he can do ERP, maybe he's not ready to meet with a therapist and like jump into it, but hearing stories of people going through this similar journey, having him watch this, having him watch Liz's story, for me, hearing that other people can do it and get better inspired that I could, because I had this feeling like, well, if they could do it, how come I can't do it? What is so different about me than them? They don't come with some magic gift that able to get them through it. So for me, it was really just a lot about that. And then the second thing, Felice, is like reconnecting with your why. There were so many things. I enjoyed sports. I enjoyed friends. I was outgoing. I was always like such a full of life, and I became just a shell of myself. And so not only was it hearing success stories, but the second thing that motivated me was connecting with my why and having a vision of what my life could look like if I got back into help. And those two things were really a big motivator. And then the good thing is once you start making progress in ERP, success breeds success. And then I was just ready to keep going.
100%. And I love the why. It's so important when we think about motivation. And what we know is that for most of us, Chris in his place, me in my dark place, and potentially your husband, Felice, is that we lose the why because we don't think it's possible. But it's important to bring that back to the forefront. And that often comes by motivation from others. San Diego was actually also my first conference. Chris, we're not going to repeat the year that conference was because IOCDF still thinks Chris and I are young professionals. And so we're just going to pretend as if we are still these like young adults in our early 20s, but we're not anymore. But the reality is that the why gets lost when you're in the middle of a struggle because you can't see it. Other people have to remind you of it. Other people have to help point you to it. The second piece I'll say is education. Educate yourself. Get connected with a family support group like the one that Liz runs, right? These are ways where you can have support too because you need it. I know you talked a little bit later about anger and screaming. Like you need support of how do I support? How do I help if what you're kind of the situation you're currently in isn't working? Thank y'all for so many great advice. So many people, Chris and Liz and Selena are thanking you because your story is so inspirational and has been amazing to them. Kelly, thank you for sharing your story of motivation. Taryn at 1126 said, what advice do you have for families with younger children? Chris.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll start and then Mom can jump in. I think what would have helped me as a young child is that when those things kind of came up, even if my mom didn't know what it was, is like getting me some kind of help. But I think also, I always look back to the stuff I was doing in school and the struggling and the way that the school system always treated me was like I was a problem. Like he's late, he doesn't show up. Like nobody at the school ever was like, hey, can you talk about why? And so I think that that's something that I hope schools can shift towards is figuring out what's going on with your kid and not just assuming that they're just a bad kid who doesn't want to show up. And so, obviously I don't fault my mom now because there was not as much resource, but I would say, when I was showing certain signs, it would have just been helpful to get that kind of help. The good thing about kids is we like to make parents happy. We like to make authority figures happy. So if we have a therapist that's separate, that's helping us, or a counselor at school or someone, we want to do what they want us to do. And so I think if you can find a trained counselor, kids, I don't think I would have listened to my own mom if she knew what OCD was. So it needed to come from an outside source. I don't know if Mom or Selena, if there's anything that would have helped us when I was younger and showing all my signs.
Well, I would definitely say as someone who taught elementary school, involve the teacher. I was always trying to learn. I was begging for professional development of autism, anything to understand how to best support different, disorders or things kids could come in with. So hopefully, because I loved all my coworkers, so hopefully your child's teacher is very open and have that conversation, because I know my friends and myself, if a parent had come to me and said, hey, this is what my child has, here's some things, or even if the therapist is willing to talk to them, or here's some things that they may need throughout the day, I know as a teacher, I would have made that effort to help as well.
So we definitely know, right, collaboration with the school system is critical.
Yeah.
I also am a big believer of family therapy, right? Most clinics have a family therapist or someone they work closely with that if it's a young kid, that child should be in treatment, but the family should be in treatment too, right? If I'm treating a 12-year-old, I should be bringing mom, dad, siblings, whoever I need to into sessions because the treatment involves them. They're going to have to quit answering reassurance. They're going to have to quit enabling, right? And we need to have that team communication and plan in place. The second piece I'll say is the OCD camp. The OCD camp for kids is coming up in January, and it is specific for this reason, that we know that younger kids need their own group, their own network. So 100% check that out. And the last advice I'll give Taryn that my mom talks a lot about is she's grateful she was able to start getting me into treatment when I was a minor. Because the reality is that I was very against treatment. I didn't believe in it and didn't want to go. And I fought it with everything I had. But my mom was able to make the decisions where if I was 18, I could have made my own decisions and she would have had zero control over me going to treatment, participating in treatment, and what that would have looked like. And so, the second more important piece of that is that the younger we get you in, the better the outcomes are, right? Preventative medicine is always better than reactive. So we'll keep that in mind. I know we're not going to get to all the questions. Our time is up. And so I'm sad about that. But what we see is there's a huge need for us to have these family talks because there is so much discussion. I know, Chris, over the holidays, we're going to be doing another family talk. Maybe we'll bring your family back on instead of mine so that we can do kind of a series 2 if Liz and Selena are up for that, and we can get to the rest of these questions. We will make sure we jot all of these questions down, and if Chris and I aren't able to answer them prior, we will 100% answer them at next week's Lunch and Learn, which I believe is Chris's Corner. So that will be next Wednesday, the same time. So noon Eastern time, 11 my time, 9 a.m. Pacific. So we're all trying to keep up with time zones, but it has been incredible. The message I want to leave everyone with, and then Chris, Liz, and Selena, I want you to leave them with a message, is that help and hope is always available. Y'all know I always say that, but this is a perfect story and example of somebody who hit a point where, Chris, you didn't know hope existed. You didn't know hope was feasible. Liz, you fought for him to be able to find that. And not only did he find that, but he's giving that hope to other people every day. So I am so grateful for your family and y'all's story and the impact that you have in the OCD world. Chris.
Yeah, my final thing would be, I would not be here today if my mom did not advocate for me. And so everybody who's watching, whether you're a husband, whether you're a kid with a parent with OCD, or whether you're an adult with a child with OCD, don't give up. Now, unfortunately, if the person doesn't want help, that doesn't mean you can force them into help, but you also don't have to just give up on them. So because my mom fought hard, it allowed me to get to the point that I am today. And my sister, just being somebody who loved me and cared and gave me an outlet and was just showing compassion, was enough. So if you don't feel like you're enough, sometimes just simply asking how your loved one's doing or having a conversation about something fun is what they need. So as somebody with OCD, having them two by my side made me confident that I could get better.
You want me to go next?
Yeah.
I would just say, whether you're watching, you're the person with OCD or a family member, like, you took the first step. So, it may not seem like a big deal, but even just coming on here is first steps. And that's what I tell people every day here at work is, I think they'll go the questions and try to think so far out. Go step by step, take it step by step. You'll figure out the next steps. If you're at treatment or a center, they're going to help you through all of that. So you're already finding the right avenues. You're finding positive places to hear stories like this one. You're trying to find a specialist. So just keep going step by step and celebrate your mini steps as well. Because I know for some people, just even coming on here may have been difficult, and maybe making a call to a center or therapist is difficult. So celebrate those, because each time you do that, as Chris said, it's a win for yourself, and you're going to keep motivating yourself to keep going. So congratulations for being here.
I would say that use the resources out there. There's a lot of resources. For me personally, every time I see somebody in our family group, I see them come in, and then I see them later after treatment and their life going back to college, or the young kid that's not afraid of going to school anymore. Every single story like that keeps me going. And I think that everybody, no matter how you get motivated, positive stories and knowing the end is really important. And there's just so many resources out there where you can go to the conferences, do the conferences online while they're all free for the next couple of months, and take advantage. You'll learn so much and you'll be so inspired.
The piece I love that I want to end with as a reminder is IOCDF.org, right? Chris talked about the fact, and so did Liz and Selena, that resources existed that they didn't know. But once they found those and they made that call, they realized, like, this isn't their first rodeo, right? This is what they do all day long. They field and help guide people to the right places. So don't do the work yourself. Lend on resources that exist and that are out there and that can help guide you to the right places and right people, because that is the difference between management and not of our symptoms when we get with someone who's an OCD specialist. Thank y'all for joining. We are going to pull the questions we didn't get to, so we'll be sure to answer those in the next week. And Chris, Liz, and Selena, all my gratitude for all you do. Love you guys.